Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this planning subcommittee meeting here in Tottenham Town Hall. My name is Barbara Blake. I'm the chair of this committee, and I'm a Seven Sisters ward councillor. So I just want to have member introductions first, starting with the vice chair on my left, and then moving over to Councillor Corley Harrison. Vice chair.
Reg Rice, Vice Chair of this committee, a member for Tottenham Hill.
Luke Corley Harrison, Crouch End Councillor.
Alexandra Worrell, Councillor for Stroud Green.
Nicola Bartlett, West Green Councillor.
George Dunstall, Stroud Green.
Matt White, Tottenham Central Councillor.
Ajda Ovett, Northumberland Park Councillor.
Kathy Brennan, Muswell Hill Councillor.
Lester Buxton, Crouch End Councillor.
Thank you very much. If we can have introductions of the officers, please, starting on my right.
Robbie McDocker, Head of Development Management.
Philip Elliott, Principal Planning Officer.
Rob Shastovsky, Assistant Director for Planning, Building Standards and Sustainability.
Matthew Barrett, Legal Services.
Fiona Ray, Committees Manager, Clerk to the Committee.
Gareth Prosser, Planning Officer.
Suzanne Kimmen, Climate Change Officer.
And Richard Truscott, Design Officer.
Thank you. And other officers will introduce themselves when relevant. So we're on to item 1. This is filming at meetings. This meeting is being recorded. All registered speakers should be aware that they will be recorded for live or subsequent broadcast via the council's internet site or by anyone attending the meeting. Item 2. Members and speakers are requested to note the information set out at item 2 on the agenda, which is the planning protocol. Can we close the door? Thank you. So we have apologies for absence have been received from Councillors John Bevan and Yvonne Say, and Councillor Kathy Brennan is present as a substitute. So welcome, Councillor Brennan, thank you. There are no items of urgent business, and we're on now to item 5, declarations of interest. Do members have any declarations of interest? No, okay. Item 6, to approve the minutes of the meeting held on the 6th of June 2022. Do we approve these minutes? We do, okay, they're approved. So we're now on to the planning applications, and the first one is the Hale London 2304, the Hale London N17 9JZ. And this is at item 8 in the pack. So the recommendation, I won't read out the proposal because that's in the pack. The recommendation is to grant. So I'll now hand over to Philip Elliott to introduce this application.
Thank you, Chair. Okay. So the site is located at the heart of Tottenham Hale, very close to the station. The site itself is on an island surrounded by Hale Road to the north, the Hale to the southwest, and Station Road to the south and east. Tottenham Hale is a public transport orientated centre undergoing transformative change. Several permitted proposals delivering new office, retail, health and community facilities beneath higher density residential space have been constructed or are under construction. The site is near to Down Lane Park, which is just to the north of the site, and a 10-minute walk to the Paddock, the Riverlea, Walthamstow wetlands to the east. So the site sits within site allocation TH4 in the Tottenham Area Action Plan, or AAP. The district centre hosts several allocations to the west, east and north of the station, which have permissions for redevelopment, with many of these currently under construction. To the east of the railway, Hale Village and Hale Wharf have been constructed, with sites along Ashley Road constructed or with permission. Adjacent to the site, Argent Related are constructing a master plan within allocations TH4, TH2, TH5 and TH8. So to the east and southwest of the site on North Island are Millstream Tower or One Station Square and Hotel Premier Inn. The application site is also surrounded by parts of the Argent Master Plan, which includes the Welburn site to the northwest, which will comprise retail space and a new health centre with council homes above. Building 3 on North Island, immediately to the south of the site, which is a mix of market and shared ownership housing with commercial ground floor uses. Ashley Road West, which also has market and shared ownership homes with commercial ground floor uses. Ashley Road East, which is market residential buildings with commercial ground floor uses, and Ferry Island to the southeast of the site, which would contain 2 buildings of various heights with market residential above ground floor commercial uses around a new square. So this slide just shows some images of the immediate surroundings, which highlight the new high density development emerging in the district centre with low-rise housing to the west of the site. And so the proposal would consist of a Part 7, Part 24-storey building containing 451 rooms of purpose-built student accommodation, with 3 retail units on the ground floor and part of the first floor, and 10% of those rooms would be accessible. So as touched on before, the area is undergoing a lot of change with improvements to the station and the construction of the Argent Master Plan. The Argent sites at Welburn, North Island and Ashley Road East and West are nearing completion, with the Ferry Island site to the southeast due to start soon. This next slide just shows that emerging context in a CGI. This is a view looking south with the site just in the bottom right hand corner, with Welburn here beyond. So this slide just indicates some of those ground floor uses that are coming forward in the Argent Master Plan, which will include a range of retail, food and beverage and other services and commercial functions, with the residential uses above. The Argent Master Plan will include buildings at a range of heights, mainly in the mid to late teens in storey heights, with a 36-storey tower on Ferry Island. This image shows the proposal within that emerging context, with the proposed building completing the cluster and the redevelopment of the site allocation, as it's the last remaining parcel. This image just shows the building to be a comparable height to Millstream Tower, or formerly called One Station Square, albeit it is a storey higher. So the proposed building will reflect the 7-storey shoulder height of Millstream Tower, and would then mark the apex of the island with a 24-storey tower, which would turn the northwest corner of the island. So these next 2 images just show the proposed building in 3D modelling software, VCity. The yellow buildings are those that are consented. Many of these are sort of under construction at this moment in time. This first image is a view of the proposal looking towards the southeast. And then this next image is a view looking towards the east. And you can see this is Argent's Building 3, just to the right of the proposed building in the centre. Just a little on green links. This site just highlights the closeness of Downlane Park, as well as the vast areas of amenity to the east, including the Paddock, Walthamstow Wetlands and Tottenham Marches, which are 10 to 15-minute walk from the site. These next few slides show some CGIs of the proposal, with the first image on the left showing the western elevation of the building, and the spacing between the proposal and building 3. And image on the right showing a view from within the courtyard to the north of building 3, looking northwest towards the proposal. And this image shows a raised view of the building looking southeast in the emerging context. Again, this slide shows that image at street level with a view from Parkview Road looking southeast in the emerging context. Again, this is an image that shows sort of the apex of the corner and the closest shot of the building from the hail. And the image on the right here just shows the south and southwest elevations of the proposal with building 3 in the foreground. So the basement of the proposal would include the cycle and refuse storage for the student accommodation, as well as services and an attenuation facility for flood management. The ground floor would include those 3 retail units, as well as the main reception for the student accommodation. These uses and functions would activate the street at ground floor level. At first floor level, there would be a gym for occupants, as well as the upper level to one of the retail units. This slide shows a typical floor plan up to the 6th floor, which includes the shoulder projection, which goes alongside Millstream Tower. And this image shows a typical floor plan up the building from the 8th to the 23rd floor. This image just shows the amenity spaces at the roof levels on the 7th and 24th floor. And this slide just has some typical room layouts. The standard bedrooms would be a minimum of 13 square meters, which is similar to room sizes for purpose-built student accommodation across London. And there would also be larger room sizes for postgraduates and for the accessible and adaptable rooms. There would be level access from the Hale into the building, as well as service access from Hale Road. There would also be easy access via a fob to the basement cycle store just off the Hale. 5% of the rooms would be wheelchair accessible, with another 5% being adaptable. This level of provision is considered acceptable as it would meet building regulation requirements. Just a little bit on tall buildings and fire safety. The Council's building control team and the London Fire Brigade find the fire statements submitted with the application to be acceptable, and the recommended conditions ensure that the fire strategy would be followed. This strategy includes fitting the building with sprinklers. So the site is the last remaining parcel of land to come forward on North Island and within the site allocation. Its awkward geometry and location at the apex of busy gyratory make it less desirable for family housing. So the proposed use, given its district centre location near a major transport hub, optimises the site. The proposal would deliver commercial uses at ground floor and first floor in accordance with the site allocation. The allocation accepts that tall buildings may be acceptable on the site, and the proposal would be car-free and of a sustainable design with provision to connect to the den. So a bit on objections. Argent related, who are currently constructing the adjacent building to the south, building 3, as well as the rest of the master plan, and their future occupier of the lower 10 floors, Sage Housing, have objected to the proposals. The primary concern in the objection letters is the impact on light as a result of the height and siting of the proposed building. The applicant's daylight and sunlight submissions have been independently assessed, and the use of a mirror massing building as a baseline for comparison is accepted as being appropriate. The impact of the proposal on the homes that Sage Housing would manage on the first 10 floors of building 3 would be comparable to the impacts from a mirror massing building and from the building that Argent indicated could be delivered on the site in their master plan. When seeking permission for the master plan, Argent Related identified a possible development on the site, on the application site. This building was approximately 12 to 14 stories and is shown circled on this image. When assessing the current proposal and its impacts, the Argent master plan building has been used as another potential baseline for when assessing light impacts. So the Argent master plan building would result in non-BRE compliant impacts on building 3, particularly to the lower stories. And that's shown just in that image to the left-hand side. And when the proposed development is compared to a mirror massing building, whereby building 3 is reflected on the application site, the impacts would be comparable with the impacts from the proposal. The Argent master plan building would not have impacts on the upper floors of building 3 like the proposal would, because it is lower in height. However, a taller building at the apex of North Island on the site was always master planned for. So this slide just shows images from the district centre framework, showing a much taller building where the site is at the apex at the corner. This next slide just identifies what could feasibly be achieved on the site in development terms if the BRE guidance was followed exactly in terms of recommended VSE levels. In a dense urban environment, much lower levels of VSE in the mid-teens are considered to be acceptable. Lower VSE levels can also be accepted when a proposal is looked at in the round with other aspects such as proximity to amenities, services and transport are considered. The quality review panel have considered the proposals and find the design and architectural expression to be well considered and sophisticated. They also support the layout and detail of the student accommodation, including its amenity areas. Following initial comments from Argent Related and Sage, the applicant sought to address some of those concerns raised by reducing the depth of the building so that it would be 3 meters further from building 3 at the closest point. So this image just shows the reduction in that elevation where it's pulled back from building 3. And this next slide just shows a comparison between the original submission and the revised floor plan, showing the pulling back of the tower element to increase that space between those buildings. This slide shows the proposed distances between the 2 buildings following the revisions, and with window to window distances of approximately 18 meters or more. And so just finally on public benefits, student rooms are counted towards housing targets at a ratio of 2.5 to 1, which means the proposals would contribute 180 homes towards housing targets. Officers have negotiated a payment in lieu of on-site affordable student accommodation of over £6.5 million, which can be used by the council house building programme to deliver low-cost family housing in the local area. The proposals would also contribute to improving the public realm in the vicinity of the site, as well as over £1 million through the community infrastructure levy. And a legal agreement would also require the applicant to use reasonable endeavours to secure a nominations agreement with a higher education institution. And yeah, so the recommendation is to grant subject to legal agreement and the Mayor's stage 2 response. Thank you.
Thank you. So members can ask any clarification questions of the planning officer. So are there any questions? Councillor Buxton.
Thank you, Chair. So I think it's at sorry, I just need to find the point in the notes. 6.13.5, page 115, to do with the urban greening factor. So because this is a non-residential development, because it's student housing, it's 0.3. So my question is that this is the only point that I could find in the document that this is a non-residential development. So my question is why why student housing is considered a non-residential development, and also what other standards we should be aware of that might be dropped to a lower level in that case.
Yes, non-residential in a way because students are only there temporarily, so they're not there for the entire year. Occasionally only sort of term times. With regard to other standards, I think the main one is probably room sizes. Obviously, I touched on it in my presentation, but the room sizes are smaller than they would be for flats where people live there all year round permanently. Is there a point in particular on the urban greening? I'm just looking at that.
It was mainly because that was where it was brought up that it was a non-residential one, but I know we say that it said 0.36 and the applicant is encouraged. What can we do? I guess the other point is what can we do to further encourage them to go for 0.4 in line with other developments?
Yeah, I think it would be tricky on the site as well, just because of its sort of small size and where they would be able to practically put any more greening on the site. It would be difficult to achieve that anyway.
But I think, Councillor, perhaps as a suggestion, if the applicant was open to it, we could include a condition to look off-site for additional greening to achieve that. Certainly some street trees or something could increase the sort of canopy available to achieve that, and there should be locations in the area that could be facilitated, and there is quite a comprehensive public realm scheme going ahead in the area, and that could form part of that. In terms of other standards, I think fire obviously being a big concern on a tall building like this, this would be treated as a residential building for those purposes, and the standards would remain the same. So I think really the urban greening factor is probably an exception in the way that the policy's been drafted to treat this as slightly different. The other one, I suppose, would be there's obviously its own policy in terms of housing and affordable housing, which sets out how that's approached. But otherwise, for all the other sort of important standards, it is treated as residential.
Councillor Rice.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Can I ask who owns this land that's proposed development is the house on? Because I understood some time ago that the proprietor of the land was holding out for a large sum of money from the council. I'm not sure whether that's right or wrong, but that was the rumour. So is this land now in the council's hands? If so, did we have to pay a substantial price to get it, so to complete the development?
Good, so I'll just take that one. Land ownership, not a material planning consideration, I suppose, just to be clear on that. In terms of the price paid for the site or any of that consideration, there is a methodology for that, which is set out in guidance in terms of approaching viability. That says that it should be the existing use value plus a premium. So what the applicant actually pays can't determine the viability position. It has to follow that methodology. So that's really the only point of consideration in terms of that you should have in your mind is to be satisfied that the viability has been assessed on the basis of that, which it has, and been reviewed by an independent third party, and satisfied that this is the maximum reasonable amount.
Yeah, you haven't told me who owns it now.
Yeah, I think you will be hearing from them later on, so they will get the chance to speak. It is the owners of the current retail units there, but as I say, not something we're considering tonight.
Councillor White.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I got a couple of questions regarding the affordability aspect. So we're told that this development is 451 rooms, which is considered the equivalent of 180 homes. and that the applicant has agreed to a payment in lieu of around £6.5 million, which is the equivalent of the same development with 40% affordable housing. So I guess my first question, seeing that 40% of 180 homes is 72 homes, with that money of 6.5 million, are we able as a council to deliver something in the ballpark of 72 affordable homes, or is it a different figure? So that's the first question of clarification. The other thing that's slightly troubling me about this, obviously it's great that we're getting a payment in lieu and that we're able to use that to deliver affordable homes, which I'm assuming will be council homes at council rents, which is a priority for this council. But what concerns me a little bit is the affordability of student accommodation in Haringey itself. So I'd also like to ask, because there is some mention in the report of assessment of the need for student accommodation London-wide, but what assessment have we got of the need for student accommodation in Haringey, the affordability of student accommodation in Haringey? We have a number students only live in any specific address temporarily, but we have constantly quite a large population of students in the borough. I understand, so it'd be good to know what we've assessed in terms of the need and the need for the affordability of student accommodation. I'd also be slightly concerned that if we're not delivering on-site affordable student accommodation in this development, that because these are going to be obviously students from a higher socioeconomic background, that this could have a contribution towards gentrification of the borough and maybe a wider effect on the increase in rents in the private rental sector, which would obviously be a detrimental effect to the borough. So I'd like officers' comments on that. And finally, just looking at just having a look now, which page am I looking at? 53 of the report, from paragraph 6.4.19 onwards, it quotes two paragraphs of the London Plan. First of all, 4.4.9 of the London Plan that states that affordable housing should only be accepted as an off-site contribution in exceptional circumstances where it can be robustly demonstrated that affordable housing cannot be delivered on-site, or where an off-site contribution would better deliver mixed and inclusive communities than an on-site contribution. That seems to me to be met because of the or in that sentence. But 6.4.20, paragraph 4.4.10 of the London Plan goes on to say that payment in lieu should be used in even more limited circumstances and only where there is detailed evidence to demonstrate that on-site affordable housing delivery is not practical, off-site options have been explored but are not acceptable, and that accepting a cash in lieu contribution will not be detrimental to the delivery of mixed and inclusive communities. Because of the ands in that sentence, I am not satisfied that aspect of the London Plan policy has been met by this. So I'd like officers' comments on that as well, please. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor. So the point about the affordable element is that it would be affordable student accommodation, so it wouldn't be affordable housing as such as council housing or low cost rent. It would be based on essentially a third of students' maintenance loan for a year. So that's kind of how that's calculated in terms of the affordable student element. And that's why it would be a lower figure than you would get from 40% or whatever of the 180 homes. And I think that relates to some of those points you picked up on, is that, you know, officers have negotiated a payment in lieu because that contribution to council housing or family housing is seen as more of a priority than an on-site affordable option for students.
I'll just come in as well on some of those points. Thank you, Councillor White. Mr. Elliott's talked about the affordable. It's not equivalent to the exact number of homes because the affordable that we can use the payment in lieu monies for would generally be preferred to be council rent and conventional housing and family-sized housing, and that is where there's a sort of need for Section 106 money to do that, and there's a policy basis for that. So, and I work on the spending side of Section 106 as well, working with our housing department colleagues, and very much the need for funding is for those family-sized homes where it is more difficult to get things like GLA grant and other sources of grant to do that. So there is a need for Section 106 money for affordable council family-sized homes. So just emphasising the point that Mr. Elliott has made. You also asked about what assessment has been done locally in terms of student accommodation in Haringey. Some members will be aware with the emerging new local plan, we have an emerging evidence called the Strategic Housing Market Assessment, or SHMAR, and that does consider student accommodation, but not in a great amount of detail. But essentially, the need in Haringey, perhaps unsurprisingly, is overwhelmingly for affordable housing for low-cost rent homes, which has a greater need than, say, for student accommodation, and that is the clear conclusion of our latest evidence in the SHMAR. The need is for low-cost rented homes and affordable housing. So that's the conclusion in the latest bit of evidence that we've got emerging from the local plan. Thank you.
Just sorry, final point for me, just on paragraph 6.420. I think the first point to make there is that the paragraphs cited there are not actually part of the policy. They're sort of explanatory text, so you're not necessarily going contrary to the policy in pushing those to one side. So I think you are correct that the paragraph cited at 6.4.19 is a sort of or point, so you can have each set of circumstances are valid. Whereas the paragraph at 6.420 is an and, so you should be meeting both of those. In this case, we're not, and we would recognise that. But as we said, that we're addressing what we believe to be the local need. Just taking an assessment of what the best opportunity the site presents and achieving that. So there is a conflict with that text set out in the London plan, but we believe that to be acceptable.
Councillor Worrell.
Thank you. So I understand it's a condition if the development's to be granted that the developer needs to secure a nominations agreement with a higher education institution for all or part of the proposed units. So I was wondering on that, is there a minimum of the units that they need to have secured that agreement for? And if they do secure the agreement for only part of the proposed units, what's envisaged for the rest of them? And a separate question was, it refers to the use of agreement being for student use during the academic year. So I was wondering what is envisaged for it outside of term time. Thank you.
Yeah, so it's actually in the legal agreement, so it would be a requirement for them to use reasonable endeavours to seek that agreement with a higher educational institution. Essentially, they need to prove that they need to show that they can get that on board, but if that was unachievable for any reason, then it would still be managed by a student operator. So it might not be tied directly to an institution, but it would still be only used for students. And that's also in the Section 106 agreement that it can only be used for students. Outside of term time, the policy sort of supports this, that they can, obviously it's going to be empty, so it could be used by other people that are, seeking education just in the summer as a place to stay, rather than it just being empty over the summer holidays, basically.
Councillor, I think if it would be clearer that the ultimate aim is to secure it for all and to use reasonable endeavours to do so, we could say we could change that head of term number 4 to say to to secure higher institution for all of the proposed units and failing that part, because the applicant needs that flexibility that if we made it had to be all, then there's a chance that they can't secure all and therefore they can't secure part. So you would end up with none of them linked to a nominations agreement. So I think if the applicant's in agreement with that, we could just change that to be clearer.
Councillor Dunstall.
Yeah, thank you. Just a question from me about is there a minimum term for which this property has to be maintained as student accommodation? And is that a kind of obligation, just so that it can't be turned into privately rented and sold off accommodation swiftly?
Yeah, that would be an obligation that can only be used for students. Yeah.
Sorry, that's a permanent?
Yeah, in perpetuity, yeah, for the lifetime of the development.
Councillor Corley Harrison.
Thanks, Chair. Just following up on a couple of points, just on Councillor Worrell's about use outside of term time, you said it could be used for educational purposes, but presumably it could be used for anything, right? They could privately rent out, they could use it for short-term holiday lets. There's no condition on what it can be used for outside of term time. And then on the point about sort of viability and on-site versus off-site, I think it's quite clear that there needs to be a strong evidence base to take payment in lieu. The report provides no evidence. There's nothing in the report about how that conclusion has been met. So how are we as a committee supposed to evaluate that if that evidence base hasn't been provided to us? And similarly, I know certainly I and other committee members have asked on a number of occasions for viability reports to be included as part of the pack, but again, it's not been included. We have to go and seek it out on the application itself. So again, if that feels like it's been withheld from us, that whole reaching 6.5 million, it feels a little bit like officers saying, just take our word for it, don't worry about it, which is slightly frustrating if we're evaluating this. A couple of questions. One of the major issues, and Philip mentioned it on the application, and I'm sure we'll hear about it later, is loss of light or the impact of light. And it goes into that in quite a lot of detail in the report, but it's quite dense, but also quite flaky. Like it as an example, 6.522, which is in the middle of all of probably 4 or 5 pages on this, if not more. There are several windows in recessed locations that disproportionately accentuate their VSC reductions, and a number of rooms fail to meet their BRE recommended ADF target. If we're going into such detail that we're having pages and pages sort of explaining the report, why not include the figures? Because then we just have to go back to the report and look into it again. You know, the explanation actually, I think, overcomplicates what is probably one of the most important issues. So perhaps that's something that can be looked at, because I think particularly for new committee members, this is going to be really difficult to evaluate using just what's been put into the pack. 6.1226, there is reference to officers not being satisfied with the measures that have been put in place to mitigate noise and air pollution. But then it says the recommendation is a revised overheating strategy. So I couldn't correlate that. So I'd appreciate that being explained. Also, when it's talking about local services and the impact on local services, obviously this is in the middle of a huge amount of development. There doesn't seem to be any reference to GP provisions, school provisions, you know. So again, if we're evaluating this, it'd be good to have numbers on that sort of thing. If we're adding this many students in, okay, not everyone's going to sign up for a GP, but some might. Is there adequate provision in the area? is the 106 sufficient for those things? Because I think it only talked about one particular local service provision. And then also, I'd be interested to know regarding wind and microclimate, whether the evaluation has been limited to just the impact on this building and its red line, or whether the impact has also provided an evaluation of the other buildings that are coming forward that are not yet perhaps developed, because we know that every tower that goes into the island or within proximity is going to have some kind of impact. So has that been scaled out? And I think the rest I'll come back to later.
Yeah, so that first point, as I understand it, the point about outside term time, it should be related to something educational. So whether we can agree that with the applicant, or they could talk more later about, you know, how that would be restricted or who it would be for outside term time, we could deal with that then, and then we could feed that into a condition or the legal agreement itself. I might have muddled some of these up, but paragraph 6.5.22 is actually corrected in the addendum. Yeah, so it's on page 5 of the addendum. There's the whole paragraph's essentially clarified and made a lot clearer about what the impacts are on that particular building in the Argent Master Plan. It does say there are some major impacts, but it does give an explanation for that. In terms of GP provision, there's a large health centre which is going to be delivered in the bottom of the Wellbourne, which was that building in the Argent Master Plan just to the northwest of the site that's being delivered. And in terms of school places, it's not particularly relevant because obviously it's student accommodation, so there's not going to be sort of children that are eligible to go to school. In terms of wind, yeah, that was independently assessed as well, and they do assess the cumulative impacts. With this particular building being one of the last in the cluster or Tottenham House Centre, it's actually had to deal with some of those wind impacts from some of the other buildings. And that's why there is that baffle on the side elevation, which essentially has always been built into the design to deal with the wind issues and to make sure the pedestrian environment and any wind impacts on areas around it are satisfactory and acceptable for what their intended use is. I think you mentioned a point about the overheating condition, or a condition relating to overheating. So I think in that particular point, the condition that's attached in relation to overheating will require that information for that to be clarified. So they'll need to identify what the impacts are and how they're dealing with the noise impacts relating to it. And I think in terms of viability, yeah, we could have appended it to the pack. I think I'll try to do that in future. It has been through it's been independently assessed, the viability by the council's assessor, and also because the scheme is referable due to its height, it's actually gone through the GLA viability assessors as well. And out of that process, that's why we've got to where we've got to. Basically, it's gone through that sort of not only one round, but 2 rounds of sort of independent assessment to reach that figure.
Do you want me to take the one on assessment of on-site provision? The answer to that is there's no reason it's not an on-site provision. Perhaps could have been clearer on that, but we have advised the applicant that we believe the council's preference is to support council housing and low-cost rent. So we've given them that steer to propose that as part of their development. So that's why there has been no assessment of that. And if you wanted any further detail on the overheating point, we do have our climate change officer available if you'd like to hear from her.
Maybe later. It was, I guess Philip kind of answered it in that the condition is going to cover all of the parts related to noise, air pollution and overheating, but fall under a condition that's called overheating, even though it covers all aspects. Is that That's effectively what you're saying, right?
Yes, yeah, because one of the mitigations for overheating is to open your windows. So yeah.
If I could just come in, Chair, and just on the point about the viability and the justification for that, and the justification for the payment in lieu that you've asked about, Councillor Corley-Harrison, we've set that out on pages 52 to 54, which sets out how we've justified that, and also how we've negotiated that up as officers from 3.7 million up to 6.5 million. However, I hear what you say, that you don't feel that full justification is there, but that is our justification based on the policy basis, and then how we've considered the benefits of using payments in lieu for affordable council homes, low cost rented accommodation and family accommodation. So we think it's set out there in the report, but completely hear your concerns around that.
Did you want to come back with any other questions, Councillor Corley-Harrison? I have got the other.
No, after we've heard the,
Councillor Ovett and then Councillor Buxton. Councillor Ovett.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to raise the point about the concern noted by the Health and Safety Executive relating to the subdivision of the corridors, particularly the means of escape from the roof terrace. I just wanted to get officer comments to address that concern, especially as, let me just find another page where the roof terrace escape was mentioned. Bear with me. In terms of at page 211, it was mentioned that according to the fire statement, in the event of a fire evacuation, people on the roof terrace will only have one means of escape. So I just kind of want to get clarification of how that concern is going to be addressed. Thank you.
Yeah, so the applicants did put together a technical note to respond on that point. So I think it was an element of a confusion from the HSE and how it operates, but effectively the technical note deals with that and explains how the evacuation strategy would be developed and verified further to make sure that there'll be appropriate means of escape from the roof terrace. But yeah, and we've also got the condition relating to the fire strategy, which makes sure that that would be delivered. And then they would obviously have to go through building control and meet building regulations to make sure there would be suitable means of escape in the event of a fire from the roof terrace.
And thank you, Chair. And just to add to that a little bit further, I'm sure you spotted, but fire safety and security is covered on pages 1 to 5. But it's a really good question that you've asked. It's worth reminding councillors that the amount of detail that we now consider in planning for fire safety is greater than it's ever been before. A year ago, something was introduced called Gateway 1 for tall buildings, which includes the referral to the HSE, which is why we've got this HSE comment now. And also in the last 2 weeks, the government has published a new circular relating to high-rise buildings as well and fire safety. And that has been considered in the, I think there's a statement in the addendum on that as well, to show that it's meeting not just the Gateway 1, which was new a year ago, but the latest circular from the government from a couple of weeks ago, to show how that has been addressed. So it has, we consider this issue now much more than, you know, historically previous planning applications. So a lot of work's gone into that. Building control, so the Haringey building control team have looked at this and there's not an objection, and you'll see the comments from the fire brigade as well have been satisfied with this too. And the key point here is as much as possible is detailed into this scheme at this stage right now, but there are still conditions relating to detailed fire engineering analysis and so on, and that's set out in more detail in the addendum on page 2. But we do give this very rigorous checks through not just our own building control, but the fire brigade and the health and safety executive comments. Thank you.
Councillor Buxton.
Thank you, Chair. Just another one, kind of following on from Councillor Corley-Harrison's point on the services and the number of students. It's a car-free development, but this is a student accommodation, so we're going to have people moving in and out on a yearly basis. Most of them moving in a week, 2 week period at the end of September. maybe moving out at Christmas, coming back in January, moving out in July, whenever. It's a busy junction. I just wondered whether there had been any survey on how we're going to get 400 students moving in a week, how they're expected to get there. I certainly had my parents drive me to university with a car full of stuff. Whether we're expecting all the students to take their duvets and their blankets on a overground train to Tottenham Hale. Yeah, what is the facilities for that? Because I can envisage a lot of congestion coming in around that junction.
Yeah, I think it's sort of more of a management answer, really, which I'm sure the applicants can detail a bit more later. You know, I'd expect the management of the building to run it so that they would stagger, you know, people coming in so that we wouldn't all be coming in at the same time, so they can manage that. Obviously, the policy is to support student accommodation near transport hubs, so that's kind of where they're normally going to be. And obviously, with a site like this, it's constrained and there's limited places where those people can go. So therefore, it has to be full-on sort of management and how they manage that and make sure that there's no clash or lots of people sort of going there all at one time.
Okay, thank you. Are there any more clarification questions from the committee? No? Okay, well, thank you for that. So we'll now move on to the objectors. We have two objectors here, Sage Housing and Ian McKenna on behalf of Argent Housing. So you each have 3 minutes each. Could you just introduce yourself when you start, please? Thank you.
Hi, evening chair, evening committee. My name is Ian McKenna from Hollis Global. I'm a director there, and I'm a daylight consultant, have been for 15 years, and I'm a member of the RICS. My client, Argent Related, who's bringing forward the Tottenham Hale Centre development, has significant concerns about the impact of the jigsaw proposals on daylight amenity for the future occupiers of one of the buildings under construction, namely Building 3. This stems from the design of the proposals before us, which, as stated in the GLA's Stage 1 report, results in an abrupt change in urban scale and does not respond appropriately to the existing low-rise context, nor the emerging master plan context. The two key points that we have are the application of the mirror image assessment, which is relied heavily upon by the officer's report, and the reduction in the BRE target for VSC. Regarding the mirror image assessment, the applicant has understated the number of Building 3 windows which have a VSC result worse than the mirror target. The image on page 45 of the committee report suggests that 15 windows to Building 3 do not meet the mirror image targets. However, the results in the applicant's report indicate that 72 windows, not 15, do not meet the mirror image targets. It's therefore been understated. In relation to the BRE VSC target, the applicant has reduced this by about half, from 27% to 15% VSC. However, even with this materially reduced target, over 85% of the windows tested in Building 3 do not achieve this low 15% VSC target they have set. In fact, 17 windows are below 5%, 49 windows are between 5 and 10%, and 50 windows are between 10 and 15%. Therefore, a total of 116 windows out of the 136 tested are below the reduced 15% target. This represents a material failure to meet even a significantly reduced daylight target. To put this into context, the BRE guide states that VSC results between 5% and 15% occur. It is very difficult to achieve adequate daylight, and a VSC of below 5% means that it is often impossible to achieve reasonable daylight. In summary, the results of the mirror image assessment have been misreported as 72 windows failed to achieve the mirror targets, as opposed to the 15% of windows indicates indicated in the applicant's report. However, of more concern are the actual daylight results, which show that light levels to 116 windows will be substantially lower than the 15% reduced target that the applicant has set. And a significant number of those will be very low indeed, in some cases with little or no direct light in the rooms. This would lead to a very poor, arguably unprecedented level of daylight for future occupiers. The rooms will be gloomy with the inevitable impacts on health and well-being, energy use and sustainability. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. McKenna. Thank you. So we now have speaker from Sage Housing, and you have 3 minutes yourself. Could you just introduce yourself, please? Thank you.
Lucian Smithers, the Chief Customer Officer of Sage Homes, and good evening, committee members, and thank you for the chance to speak. Sage is the largest provider of new build affordable homes in England, and I'd like to stress that we have never objected to a neighbouring planning application because we believe in the desperate need for housing supply. However, we urge you to refuse the application before you this evening because the impact it will have on the quality of life and finances of those who will soon to be residents in Building 3 next door. In partnership with Argent, Sage is delivering 108 affordable homes at Tottenham Hale for people in the borough who are deemed to be in housing need. Overall, that's at least 200 of our residents, individuals, couples, families moving into this exciting development from later this year. Neither Sage nor Argent are against the applicant building a sensitive scheme next door, but this development would wrap itself around our residents' affordable homes, blocking natural daylight from around 30 of these households, meaning darker homes and higher energy bills, as you've just heard. Incredibly, this application would mean some of our apartments get little to no natural daylight, requiring residents to turn their lights on during most of the day. We all know that natural daylight improves well-being, including mental health and sleep levels. We also know rising energy costs are a particular worry for all households, but especially those on lower incomes. If this application had been proposed next to an established community, I'm sure you would have expected a robust objection from the local residents at this committee. The future residents of Building 3 may not yet be in their affordable homes, but they do need a voice, not least because they have far less choice about where they can live. In our view, this application falls short in many ways, but most importantly, this application's daylight analysis is not just incomplete, we do believe it to be unlawful because it doesn't meet the latest BRE guidance. And I accept that for the committee, the provision of the maximum amount of affordable housing is the most important issue, but we do believe that the livability of these homes that we are delivering is also important. So we urge you to refuse this application and work with the applicant on a better scheme that we can all live with. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Smithers, Mr. McKenna. So the members can ask questions of the objectors. Councillor Corley Harrison.
Thank you. As we have an expert in Mr. McKenna, I was wondering if you could perhaps explain a little bit what the mirror image methodology is to work out the targets. And I think you're representing Argent. I don't know if someone from Argent, perhaps Sage can explain how this varies from the master plan, which presumably you would have been happy if something was built in accordance with the master plan in terms of the impact on your building.
Yes, so now I'll have a go at explaining the mirror approach, which is that in this case, a model of Building 3 was put onto the application site, the same distance from the boundary as Building 3 is from its boundary. And the windows in Building 3 were then tested against that mirror image of itself on the application site. And the results from that are used to define the VSC targets, or they become the baseline VSC targets for, against which the jigsaw proposal was tested. So that is a, there's a fairly standard methodology for applying the mirror image, which is contained in the in Appendix F of the BRE guide, and it just is a way of setting alternative targets for a proposed development. What we're saying here is that even using the mirror image baseline figures, the proposal takes more light away in the case of 72 windows than you would find with a mirror image of Argent's Building 3. Thank you.
Councillor, did you want to?
Well, just to answer the second question, in terms of the massing of the master plan building was considerably smaller and would affect considerably fewer properties. And those at the very lower levels might have been affected by a 12-storey building rather than the whole flank of the building, which is now obscured because of the height of this proposal.
Chair, if I might just come in, because obviously we're going into an area of expertise that none of the committee are experts on, and obviously that's not expertise of planning officers. And in this case, we have carried out a third-party review for this reason, to allow an expert in this to advise the committee and officers on what's acceptable here. And that is set out in the report that this mirror massing is acceptable. The report carried out by the applicant, there was nothing found in there to be untoward. So that is the basis for officers' recommendation that that it is robust and it is reasonable. You got that, did you?
Did everyone hear the last? Yeah. Okay. Councillor Rice.
Yeah, I just want to know, this site is, who is the owner of it, please? The person who just spoke, well, obviously developers working on behalf of the proprietors of the site. Is that correct? And who are these proprietors?
No, we spoke on behalf of the neighbouring owners, not the owners of the site.
Just tell me, who are the owners of the site? No?
I don't know.
We can ask that of the applicants, Councillor Rice. So are there any other questions? No? Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. So we now come to the applicant supporters. I think we have Mr. Jim Hindle from Jigsaw and Liam Dunford. Okay, so you have the same time as the objectors, as the and your time starts now. Thank you.
Good evening, Liam Dunford, Point 2 Surveyors, Specialist Daylight Surveyor. The site is currently underdeveloped with little massing. Therefore, any scheme that is to match the proportions of the neighbouring developments will cause a material reduction in light to Building 3, particularly since Building 3 ignored BRE guidance in locating windows too close to the boundary. The BRE discusses this bad neighbour principle in detail and dedicates a whole appendix to it, Appendix F, for reference. The guide suggests using a mirror massing of Building 3 as the baseline. This approach, which is very much part of the BRE guide and has been confirmed as correct by Delver, Pam and Redler, who were appointed by officers as independent experts. Furthermore, Argent have submitted several objections, one of which commissioned the BRE, in which it promoted the use of the mirror massing, perhaps not the answer Argent had hoped for. Turning to the mirror massing, the proposed development demonstrates that most reductions, particularly those at low level, are within 20%, or where the percentage goes above 20%, the quantum change is just not noticeable. Reductions of 20% or less are often considered by the BRE as unnoticeable. That's where we get the concept of BRE compliance from. The reductions of 20% are on the upper floors of the building, where the retained VSCs, as you would expect at the top of a tower, are consistently good and in that mid-teen levels that the officer referred to previously. Thus, the impacts of the scheme are comparable or indeed compliant with the BRE guidance for the lower floors when considering the mirror massing approach. Furthermore, I understand Argent have previously tried to acquire this site and had a scheme drawn up. We have referred to this as Building 4, as I understand the officers do. And this is formed part of the assessment submitted to the officers in coming to the conclusions. The latest objection, dated I think it was 1st of September, compares building 4 with my client's proposed development. And indeed, some of these percentages do go above 20%, but they are of such a small quantum, they are not noticeable. The objection is conveniently highlighted in red, which I think is only to attempt to alarm people reading that summary. There is no material difference in how Argent's proposed building 4 would compare to that presented before you, which my client has submitted. I very much doubt the objections heard and the arguments proposed would have been aired had it been Argent bringing forward this site, should they have successfully acquired it. I would like to thank the officers and council's independent expert for a very thorough and detailed examination of all data and being recommendation to you this evening. Thank you.
Can you switch off your mic, please? So, is there anyone from the applicant supporters wants to say anything else? Well, okay, all right, thank you. Go on.
Yeah, good evening. This is an important planning application and therefore an important decision for the committee. In large-scale urban regeneration projects, it is generally the largest and most important sites which come forward first. But with this application, it is the key gateway site being considered last. This enabled us to consider how surrounding sites had been resolved to ensure that our building will be of the highest quality design and appropriate for its prime position. Following initial consultations and a pre-application presentation to the committee, a formal planning application was submitted in July 21 for a scheme of 473 student bedrooms. During 2021, we had been consulting regularly with Argent as our design evolved. But when they chose to object to the scheme, we decided to respond in a good neighbourly manner by reducing the width of the tower by 30% to pull it further away from building 3. And in January 21, these revisions were submitted. In his report to committee, the design officer, Richard Truscott, directly addressed the Argent objections by stating, there has been detailed discussion between the officers, the applicants and representatives of Argent regarding the impact of this proposal on their adjacent development. Officers consider that on balance, the impact is reasonable. The scheme design has been reviewed twice by Haringey's design panel and they have been hugely supportive, and in their final written response appended to the committee report, they concluded that the scheme is well considered and sophisticated and that they support the scale and massing of the scheme. The financial benefits to Haringey are considerable. This will include 300 construction jobs, many of which will go to local people through apprenticeship schemes, and 20 to 25 full-time jobs when the building opens. As previously mentioned, we have agreed to a payment in lieu of approximately £6.5 million, which will go towards local social housing in the borough, which is equivalent to 40% on-site affordable student units, would have been a more typical provision. Additionally, there will be a Section 106 contribution, including Borough SIL, of approximately £2.1 million to be allocated for other local needs, plus a GLA community infrastructure payment of £800,000. Therefore, in total, the financial package is £9.4 million. Officers have recommended the scheme for approval as they agree that the application is well designed and in line with Haringey policy. It responds fully to the challenges created by the adjacent buildings in a good neighbourly way and will provide a building of high architectural merit on this landmark site and allow local businesses to secure their future in the area.
Could you wind up, please, now? Could you finish, please, now?
Yeah, we urge the committee to approve this application.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, so we I'm going to let the members ask the applicant questions. There are other attendees here who I think might answer some questions, but I'm going to ask Councillor Rice. You've been asking a question. What's your question, Councillor Rice? Yeah. Well, if you just want to ask it again now.
Simply this, this site has been outstanding, vacant for a long time, and I understand there's been some difficulty procuring the site. So I want to know at this stage, who owns the site and what sort of money was paid for it, and was there any public money involved in that?
Yeah, the site is privately owned. It's currently a menswear shop. It's privately owned. Yes, and it's a menswear shop. The owners are actually at the back of the room here.
That menswear shop hasn't.
It's Morelli Menswear.
The doors have been open to the public over the last 7 years, but no public goes in and out of it.
I think actually they've been in occupation of the site for over 40 years, trading as a menswear shop, and prior to that, clothing manufacturing on the site.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Buxton.
Yeah, following the two questions that I asked of officers. So firstly, to do with the urban greening factor, I know that you're not, because it's non-residential, you're not required to go to 0.4, but would you consider a condition being put on so that there was, as Robbie said, contributions to public realm greening elsewhere? So that's the first question. And then the second one is again about the practicality of moving in 400 odd students, and whether you've considered or whether the management has considered how moving in and out 400 students on a yearly basis on quite a busy junction is going to work.
Just to pick up the first question about public green, the urban greening, yes, we're happy to accept that condition. And the second question in relation to moving students in, the building would be operated by an ANUC operator, which is a registered operator. The operator in mind currently operates around 37,000 beds across the UK. So they're very used to dealing with this. So the way it normally works is it's done on a timetable basis with the students, but it's an issue that comes up every year for every student block across the country, and the management team are very well used to dealing with that.
Councillor White.
Thank you, Chair. I just wonder if we do we have anyone, an officer from the Transport Planning Department that can respond on the practicalities of moving students in and out? Maurice, hi.
Hi, Chair. Yep. So, Chair, there are two loading bays close by for those who decide to drive and drop their children off. I think the car-free restriction is about more students owning car rather than parents dropping cars off. So there's two loading bays, one on Hill Road and the other one on Station Road, that parents will be able to drop off their children if they are going into this unit. And also, in addition to that, is a service and delivery plan that's secured by the Section 106 agreement. As part of that, whoever the operator is will have to provide details of their schedule for dropping off and collection of our children yearly. And then this is where the slots will come into, in terms of people booking slots for dropping off if they need to drop off, or we'll know who's coming by car as part of the travel plan, which is also secured by Section 106 agreement.
Any other questions? Councillor Corley-Harrison.
Well, yeah, on that last point, I think we would want it by condition confirmed that would be detailed, including, you know, where vehicles are going to be dropped. I mean, 2 loading bays is not going to facilitate this, is it, realistically? And they're probably going to be full anyway, because they always are. So I think we want quite a lot of detail. So if that can be firmed up. Then I also wanted to ask I'll come to the first statement that was read out that gave an indication that the independent daylight assessment said that the scheme was okay. It doesn't say that. It says you have to make an unbalanced decision.
So I think that was slightly misleading because it does make clear that there is a major adverse impact on daylight on building 3. And I think we can all determine that building 4 has absolutely no impact on our decision making here. It doesn't exist. You know, it's not being brought forward. So what they may or may not have done shouldn't affect our decisions here at all. So I would like you to come back on the objector's point, which was that there will be 17 windows below the 5%, that 85% are below the target of 15%, and that you believe that that's acceptable impact on the neighbouring property. I would also like to understand generally about overheating of the property, particularly after this year. We know that well-glazed tower blocks can often be 10 degrees warmer internally than the ambient temperature. And as we're hitting 40 degrees this summer, what you are planning on doing to manage the overheating. And I think realistically, none of us want to just hear windows will have the ability to open, because that will have no impact if the ambient temperature is so high. I think there was maybe reference to mechanical ventilation in some of the lower stories, but how, you know, what is your plan for overheating there? And I think that's probably the main points. I'll leave it at those points. Thanks. If Mr. Trescott wants to come in on the overheating, I don't mind whether it's the applicant actually or officers, whoever's better suited.
It might be useful to hear from our sustainability officer on that, Suzanne, if you want to just comment.
Yeah, thanks for your question. So you're asking how the overheating would be managed currently. So as proposed, the applicant is relying on natural ventilation. As you say, in more extreme weather files in the future, the external temperature will be a lot higher than internally, so natural ventilation will be very difficult in that instance. But for the mandatory weather file, they do pass with natural ventilation. However, as noted in the officer's reports, that is assuming that there are no air quality and noise constraints. It was felt that that was not adequately addressed. So it may be that the applicant needs to remodel based on closed windows and therefore go to mechanical ventilation as a mitigation measure. Does that answer the question?
It does. So I guess part 2 would be, is the applicant looking at that? Because I know obviously the pack references a further overheating report. So what's the plan?
Yeah, on the overheating, we did do an overheating study. And through that study, we then introduced, I'll call them sort of thin blades on the southwest facing elevation in order to deal with the lateral sun, which looked like it was going to be the peak time in terms of potential thermal gain within the rooms. But over and above that, don't forget that the students will not be there in the summer months either, so that there is the times that we've experienced recently, that won't be the case. But we have done the study. It wasn't planned for reasons of sustainability, obviously, to comfort cool the any of the lower floors. That was not the case. And obviously, as a sort of byproduct of the wind measures, which are these blades that go up to about the 8th floor, those lower floors, where somebody might want to shut the windows because of traffic noise or fumes or whatever, are actually also providing another element of solar shading. But all of the windows in that elevation have got lateral blades. We've done a kind of 3-dimensional study which was submitted as part of the application, which also added a bit more texture to it, as well as having a practical purpose.
Through you, Chair, if I may, can I ask officers if upon completion the methods by which overheating is intended to be reduced are providing an environment which is too hot, essentially, does building control come into play? Is there is it just down to the management of the building to then remedy that? And if students can't cope, then they move out? I don't know whether that be a building control issue or not. And also, you just referenced the fact that students wouldn't be there over the summer, but we've discussed previously that there's a possibility of the units being tenanted over the summer. So I would like to understand what your intentions are there, because Philip mentioned that that could be conditioned to be student only rather than holiday lets or whatever.
So in terms of whether building control would deal with that, I think the reality is that once we've had additional modelling and an additional plan, we'll have to look at the carbon impacts of that, because that's ultimately what we're trying to prevent is unforeseen circumstances in terms of mechanical cooling and ventilation. So there are things in the Section 106 that would secure any uplift in terms of additional carbon offsetting requirements. So that's really our mechanism to secure this, would be reviewing their initial modelling, ensuring that's robust, and then testing it when it's built. And if that's showing up to require further mitigation, or they've had to construct that in, then we get an increased carbon offset contribution. We do have Bob from Building Control, if he could possibly just confirm whether that's a consideration of his building regs approval.
Yeah, hello. Thank you, Robbie. Thank you, Councillor. Yeah, I can confirm that would be part and parcel of the original check on the building regs. So that would come under the new Part O of the building regs. And as it shows how complex this is, whilst it's not residential in terms of planning, in building control terms, it is a residential building. Albeit another residential building rather than residential flats or low rise. So it does come under Part O, which is the new regulation for overheating. So that would be taken into account when it's checked at building control stage.
Chair, if I may, just one more point on the delivery and servicing plan. That's actually a condition 30. It's not a Section 106 obligation, as Marie said earlier. And I would suggest some additional wording to that to give members comfort. That would add a sentence to say that the delivery and servicing plan shall set out measures for managing moving in and out to avoid congestion in the area.
Okay, thank you. So, Councillor Corley-Harrison.
Yeah, sorry, my other point was in relation to the noise, which I think the applicant is still to answer on. Sorry, not the noise, the daylight.
Come on. Thank you. Yeah, I think I've got your questions. Let me know if I miss anything. Firstly, just to clarify on the DPR, Delville Patten Redder, the independent expert report, apologies if it was misinterpreted the wrong way. I was referencing its endorsement of using the mirror massing as an appropriate benchmark, just to be clear on that one. I think the number was 72 windows performing worse. I've got reams of data sets, so I might have to cover a few bases. In terms of, will the windows be materially worse when compared to the existing building? Yes, we're going to 20-story tower from 1 or 2 floors. That's why that's not necessarily the right approach. I don't know if that's what the 72 is referring to. If we're coming back to comparing it to, I think what everyone's agreed is the correct baseline, the mirror massing, do we perform worse numerically? Some windows do, yes, but I think the concept is, what is numerically worse can be very different from reality. If I'm just picking up, this is the letter that came from Argent as the objection, and then what's the red on, and I'm just looking for the biggest percentage reduction to use as a case in point, if I may, and I think I've got 16.93% reduction. Might sound a bit big, but in reality, the mirror massing gives you 7.74 VSC, and when you're dealing with that number, a 16% difference is 6.43 on my client scheme, if I can call it that. So the delta between 7.74 and 6.43 in terms of actual quantum, actual VSCs, if you like, is not noticeable. It sort of doesn't matter what the percentage is in that scenario. Nevertheless, the BRE does say reductions of 20% or lesser are noticeable. or likely to be unnoticeable.
That I understand. I suppose then the essence of the point in determination is not necessarily the difference between the proposal and the mirror mass evaluation, because as the independent report says, they're not too dissimilar, right? They're not a million miles out. And I suppose this is where I'll take it away from you, because you're both biased and turn it to officers, which is because building 3 exists and the mirror image report exists, do we then sort of absent ourselves from the guidelines somewhat and put more emphasis on the good neighbour, bad neighbour element of it? Or is there still the primary consideration, which is X amount of units within this building are going to have light levels below 15%, X below 10%, and X below 5%? What's the crucial evaluator here?
Yeah, I think that's the nub of the question, really, for you as decision makers. We've put forward what we believe to be a fair assessment, which is the mirror massing. So we've looked at the existing building and how it treats the boundary as a neighbour, and the BRE guidelines on that, and we've taken that to be a fair assessment. We've also given consideration to the impacts and whether we think they're acceptable or not. They vary. Some meet BRE, some are below the 15, some meet the 15, but we've looked at it in the round of what's a reasonable development on this site, what was proposed at master planning, what was expected when approval was granted for this building, and come to a rounded conclusion. That doesn't exclude you from saying we think these impacts are completely unacceptable. That's obviously what the objectors are suggesting should be your decision. But the BRE guidance as a starting point says that this mirror massing is an acceptable position. So to then look at an assessment of the BRE tests and say, well, it doesn't meet those, I suppose we feel it's unfair to this site as a potential development to stick strictly to the BRE guidelines, of 27% or 15, and then disregard another piece of BRE guidance that says, buildings should be good neighbours and give consideration to what should happen before or should happen after they're built. That consideration was given at the time of the assessment of that building, and a master plan proposal was put forward. We've tested it against that as a baseline. We've tested it against the mirror massing, and we believe this is a fair result in terms of that.
So in essence, there's no hierarchy of decision making when it comes to this sort of thing. It's all just, these are the guidelines. They're on a par. It's for you to determine, so to speak. And also, there's not necessarily this is obviously all the BRE guidelines, but there's not a policy, local or London or MPPF, that states if it falls below this threshold, then it would invalidate this policy or anything like that either. Because obviously we're still, it could be a very low number. We're still only following guidelines. We're not necessarily following exact policy on these figures then anyway.
Yes, yeah. And I suppose there's an accumulation of examples and appeals, that are mindful that bring to the position on accepting 15%. So, and I think you should give a consideration to how robust the position would be at an appeal, were you to go against this to say, could this be defended, when you've got the evidence you have in front of you. And I think, it was suggested I misled you in terms of what the independent assessment said. It said the methodology was robust. It didn't question that, but ultimately its conclusion was it's for the decision makers to assess whether these impacts are acceptable or not, looking at the balance. So it said the mirror massing was an acceptable approach. It said the methodologies were correct, and ultimately put it on to decision makers. So we've looked at it around the contribution to affordable housing, the contribution to housing, and those aspects, and concluded that for this location, these are acceptable homes, and in line with what was foreseen for this site.
Okay, sorry. And Chair, I'm not hogging anything. There was a question on how the site's going to be used outside of term time.
Yes, outside of term time, the rooms will generally be let to students in language schools. The GLA guidance, and certainly in terms of our viability, did assume some summer lettings as well to non-students, but it'll be students.
Councillor, we've given that some thought in terms of just enhancing the head of term to include a bit more detail on what that could include. Phil, if you just perhaps want to sort of list off the things that we would find acceptable and in line with the GLA policy.
Yes, in the policy sort of text beneath it, it specifically mentions examples such as uses including accommodation for conference delegates, visitors, interns on university placements, and students on short-term educational courses at any institution approved in advance by the borough. So I think we'd be suggesting something in the heads of terms to go along those lines that's in the text below the policy.
Okay, do members have any other questions? Go on.
The applicant mentioned the provision of jobs as part of the building work were this to be approved, and that there would be provision for these to be local jobs and potentially apprenticeships. I'm wondering if there was any kind of formal commitment to that, or whether that's just kind of an aspiration on your part.
Councillor, if I may, that is something that is set out in our supplementary planning guidance. So if the applicant was willing to commit to some of those jobs being secured locally, that would be in line with our guidance. I mean, we have seen that on owner-occupied buildings. So if they're happy, we could amend the head of term on that as well.
Yes, we'll be happy with that.
Sorry, Councillor Bartlett, my brain went dead, so I should have introduced you, Councillor Bartlett. Sorry. Are there any other questions from the Councillor Worrell?
Yeah, thank you. On page 31, and sorry, I haven't been able to find it in my document again, but it makes reference to an area of land outside of the site's boundary which hasn't been acquired yet, but it's basically included as part of the map to show what a nice bit of public realm it could make. I just wondered, like, what's the nature of that land at the moment, and have there been any discussions about sort of acquiring it or subsuming it as part of a future development?
Yeah, so that sort of semicircle of land is owned by the council, but the public realm contribution would include the landscaping of that area of land. So obviously it's in the council's gift to organise that. I think there is some sort of development option on the land, but there's that potential for it to come forward and be landscaped, sort of how it was in the image that you saw earlier.
Any other questions? No? Okay, thank you very much for that. So we'll now move to the recommendation, and I would like to ask Mr. McNarker to confirm the recommendation with a summary of any changes. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So in terms of amended conditions, I've suggested amendment to condition 30 to mention moving in and out in the delivery and servicing plan, and an additional condition to ensure that off-site greening can achieve an overall urban greening factor of 0.4. In terms of amendments to the heads of term, we have the changes to head of term 3 to define what counts as non-term time occupation that we would accept, and head of term 4 just to say that all or part should be secured through a nominations agreement, and then an amendment to head of term 5 to secure
local jobs during occupation. Then otherwise it is as set out in the officer's report and the addendum, which is a recommendation to grant subject to conditions on the 106 obligation and referral to the Mayor of London.
Thank you. Okay, so we will now vote. So all those in favour, please show. Oh, thank you. All those against? And any abstentions, please? Okay, so that's agreed. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, everyone. We will take a minute just for everyone and the online meeting. So, well, I'll allow 2 minutes. Okay. Can everyone take their seats, please, so that we can get started? Thank you. Okay, so we are now on to item 9, which is Barbara Hucklesby Close, which is N22 6PQ. And the proposal is the demolition of existing 8 bungalows and the construction of a Part 1, 2 and 3-storey building to provide supported living accommodation, comprising of 14 one-bedroom homes, a support office and communal garden. And there will be provision of 2 wheelchair accessible parking bays, refuge recycling and cycle stores and landscaping. So the recommendation is to grant, and I will hand over to the planning officer, Gareth Prosser, to introduce this application. Thank you, Gareth.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening. As the Chair spoke, the application is for demolition of 8 existing bungalows and a 3-storey building comprising 14 one-bedroom flats. The application is a little bit different in terms of these flats are supported living accommodation for council rent. The occupants of these flats will be selected by adult services and NHS services. And these are individuals who have mental health problems. But this development is a step down from more intense services and a move towards more independent living. So there will be staff on site assisting the individuals chosen to live there with out-of-hours support. However, it is a certain amount of independent living and it is supported living. There'll be a duty manager 24 hours a day on call. And there's been engagement with existing neighbours in order to remedy any concerns that people with such issues might have moving into the area. As the site location, the site is located near Wood Green. It's located just south of the Knoll Park Conservation Area. There's no other significant designations in the area other than Wood Green being a district centre. Wood Green Tube Station is located to the northwest and Turnpike Lane Station to the south. There's also a UK Power Network substation on the site, which will be incorporated into the development. So here's an aerial view of the site. The most significant surroundings are the Knoll Park Conservation Area, which is just to at the bottom of this photograph. To the top of this photograph is the Sandlands Estate, which runs along the Sandlands Road, and Mead Road to the left in this photograph. You can see in between the red line south boundary, the existing bungalows are on site, all single story. So the existing context, you have Meads Road. This is not within the conservation area and is a typical 2-storey Victorian townscape with bay windows, recessed doorways, etc. Russell Avenue is within the Knoll Park Conservation Area, which is just outside the site. So even though the proposal borders it, apart from a very small section at the entrance, the site is not located within the conservation area. The Sandlands Estate is a totally different typology. It's around 5 stories on the opposing side of the site, social housing. In terms of the Sandlands, in terms of the actual road, it's not a pedestrian-friendly road. There are no pavements. There's parking, and this has really influenced the design of the site, which I'll come on to. Here shows the entrance to the site from Russell Avenue. This will be the sole entrance to the site.
The existing bungalows, which, as I said, were built in the 1970s, are really have come to the end of their life. They're poor quality accommodation. Most of them are vacant. There's just one that is occupied at the minute. And these are used as temporary accommodation before occupants are found more permanent council housing. So they're never meant to be permanent at all. And like I said, there's just one occupant at the moment. So these are the existing prefabs. They're not of any architectural quality. As members might have seen on site, the standard of the accommodation is extremely poor, and these are really coming to the end of their usability. In terms of the proposal, the applicant looked at several options for the location of this structure. The preferred option, which was discussed with officers and the design officer and the conservation officer, was a linear block, which runs along the Sandlands. This has a number of benefits. It gives a much stronger edge to the Sandlands, much greater urban form. Currently, there's 5 stories to the one side with the Sandlands estate, and then a single story to the opposing side, which is the existing bungalows. So in terms of urban design, it's not a well-formed street. So this gives a much stronger urban edge. It also creates more of a perimeter block, which is more characteristic of the surrounding area. As I said, the proposal is for people with mental health issues, and this has been at the core of the development of the proposal. So what we particularly wanted was a domestic appearance to the proposal. So it's between 1 and 3 stories. It's not high rise. It's all centered around a communal garden, which backs onto the neighboring gardens. And this all builds into creating a more serene and calm atmosphere for the future occupants of the site. It's built in brick, and this reflects the surrounding urban form and character, both the Sandlands and the Knoll Park conservation area, and really adds to the domestic appearance of the proposal. And this is the view from the Sandlands. As you can see, it's more in keeping with the scale on the opposing side. Significantly on the Sandlands, there are a number of significant trees. These are outside of the site. These will all be retained as part of the development, although there will be a couple of trees that will be removed on site, which I will come to shortly. In terms of the layout, you can see the main access from Russell Avenue to the left, 2 on-site parking bays, the existing substation, which will be retained on site and incorporated into the development. At the core of the proposal, there's an office, kitchen facilities. This is because there will be staff that will live on site as well as work on site. In terms of building heights, at the top of the page there, you have the existing. You can see the 5 stories of the Sandlands, which then drops down to the single story of the existing prefabs, and then rises to 2 stories along Mead Road. The proposal is a 3-story building, so it's really a halfway house between the 5 stories of the Sandlands and the 2 stories along Mead and Russell Avenues. In terms of the proposed elevations, there's, as you can see, there's a lot of fenestration. This is really to add to the human scale of the development, providing overlooking to the communal garden, also providing overlooking onto the Sandlands, which gives it a much more greater feel in terms of safety and secure by design standards, a far greater level of overlooking, and really reflects more what is on the opposing side. So the design is really to create a visual bridge between the modern development, the post-war development of the Sandlands, and the smaller scale, more suburban development on the opposing side at Knoll Park and Mead Road. As I've stated, the design, whilst unashamedly contemporary, does make references to the more traditional architecture in the surrounds. The brick, the warm red brick, Also, the tripartite windows is all subtly referenced within the contemporary design. Even the larger scale estate along the Sandins, that is also brick. So here's the contemporary design, as I said, reflected in brick, the tripart windows. The architect has also worked successfully in other parts of the borough, has won awards for their designs. So we feel that this is really a high quality design, which raises the standard within this part of the borough. In terms of landscaping, there's a substantial net gain in terms of landscaping and greenery here, not just at ground level, but there's also a green roof. As I said, the trees that currently line the Sandlins, they will be retained. There will be some pruning of those trees, but the development has been built around the location of those trees in terms of piling. So we don't foresee any impact on those trees. In terms of the site, there's not really any biodiversity of value on the site. There are no high value trees. There are a couple of moderate value trees, one of which is dying and is recommended to be removed, and one which is to be removed in order to facilitate this development. However, that does offer the opportunity for increased planting, and that would include 9 additional trees on site. In terms of amenity, as I said, there was a number of options considered in terms of the location of this block. It was located on urban design terms in terms of creating that stronger edge along the Sandlins, but also in terms of distances from the neighbouring properties. So as illustrated here is 24 metres up to 27 metres away from the small scale properties facing Russell Avenue and Mead Road, and about 90 metres away from the larger Sandlins estate. So it is considered a high quality design. It has strong support from both the Council Design Officer and the Conservation Officer. It meets all the needs of the London Plan in terms of internal space standards and amenity space, and provides dual aspect homes. Further on from my previous slide, we don't envisage any significant impact on the amenity of the neighbouring properties given the distances that have been put in place, and it satisfies the BRE sunlight requirements to neighbouring properties, and therefore there's not a significant amount of overshadowing to the gardens and the neighbouring windows. In terms of transport, this will be a designated car-free development. Although it will include two wheelchair accessible units and 2 wheelchair spaces accordingly. There will be people working on site, although there's not considered a great degree of parking pressure in the surrounds. So in terms of those visiting the site, either visiting or working, there is plenty of parking space on street. And the landscaping, as I said, will include 9 additional new trees. Retains the existing trees along the Sandlins and is a significant net gain in terms of biodiversity. A fire strategy has been carried out and submitted. This is in compliance with building regulations. Sprinklers will be fitted to all homes, including the core and the on-site office. This, however, will be subject to detailed checks as part of the latter build control process should the site gain permission. In terms of planning obligations, as I said, this is 14 one-bed units. There'll be a carbon offsetting contribution should there be any change from the existing development, which is currently considered carbon-free. There'll be a car capped agreement including £4,000 contribution to amend the existing traffic order and car club membership subsidies. The application is therefore recommended for approval.
Thank you. Members, do members have any clarification questions to us, Mr. Prosser? Councillor Buxton. Okay.
Yeah, 2 from me. So I don't know whether this is a question more aimed at adult services. But it's about the aim of the is it a halfway house is basically what I'm asking. Are the residents there as a stepping stone to become more independent living and moved on to housing that is not staffed? So that's my first question. And the second one is about the Sandlings Road, which I know is not part of this. It's beyond the boundary. However, if as we reduce car use, and a lot of the developments that we've seen have been car free, if that road were to be more pedestrianised, is there flexibility in this project to allow access? Because I mean, it's not far from Turnpike Lane, but it does cut off 3 or 4 minutes to the walk to Turnpike Lane station. So is there flexibility in the project to allow access if pedestrianisation of the Sandlings was done?
Okay, I'll just take that question first. As I said, the application is a little bit different because it's for people with mental health problems. So this has been designed around the needs of adult health. And so it's been specifically designed to have one entrance, as that was what was the brief from Adult Health Services. And I think that's for a number of reasons. It's to monitor the people who can enter the building and leave the building. We are talking about vulnerable people. And that was one of the key criteria of Adult Health Services. The Sandlings, as you said, is not the most pedestrian friendly. They're a street. There are no pavements there at the minute. It was not really considered to be the most satisfactory streets in terms of directing people visiting the building, but also residents returning to the building from said tube station or any other part of the borough. There is a small service entrance onto the Sandlings, which I suppose could be opened up, but that's not really what the criteria was for the development of the proposal. In terms of the question about adult services, I think are you happy to answer that?
Hi, thank you. I'm Tim Miller, Joint Assistant Director of Commissioning for Vulnerable Adults and Children between the Council and NHS North Central London ICB Integrated Care Board. Just in terms of your question about the halfway house and the sort of duration of stay, I wouldn't characterise it as that. Our intended group that we're thinking of for this scheme would be people who are living kind of with a long-term disability of mental ill health, and often would have had periods of time in hospital or in other residential care or supported living settings over a number of years, but have reached a point where they're ready for greater independence. Often people are accommodated in shared housing, often in the private sector, and the opportunity to have an independent flat of their own, but with support, is quite difficult for us to secure. So this is perhaps somewhere, I think of it as medium-term housing in between short-term housing for people who perhaps may have been homeless recently and a home for life. It's somewhere in between that space.
Councillor Rice, please.
Can you tell me what's the minimum distance between windows in this new proposed development and current Sandlings and other dwellings thereabouts? The reason I'm asking, I believe there's a minimum distance between, and I'm not clear whether this development meets the minimum distance requirement.
In my experience, usually we would work to around between 12 and 18 metres as a minimum distance, depending on the height of the building. So these distances are 20 metres plus. Given that the building is between 1 storey and 3 stories, it tapers into in terms of its height. given the distances to the neighbouring property. So that is the reason for the 3 different stories. But in addition to that, we do have massing studies, overshadowing studies, and so it's not considered to have a significant impact in terms of loss of light or overshadowing, or indeed just being overbearing to the neighbours.
Councillor Corley Harrison.
Thank you. Yeah, a question on the staffing provision. I think we passed an application a year or so ago with the prefab houses. I think there's been some issues there, perhaps with sort of victimisation of those, not victimisation, exploitation of those living there, and questions over if there's a sufficient staffing provision there. So I'm just wondering whether whether lessons have been learned from that and what the provision would be here, because it's not clear on numbers, but also it doesn't sound like there's overnight provision on site. It sounds like you'd be able to phone someone, but then maybe it would be passed as separate services depending on what the need was. And then also, if I may, on the scheme design on page 392 of the pack, it gives the suggestion that the landscaping within the car park of the Sandlings would be redone. I mean, obviously the CGI looks a lot better than it does at present. Is the plan to landscape that area as well? Can that be included as well, seeing as though it is homes for Haringey land? Because it'd be sad to just leave that as it is, just sort of tatty lawn, I suppose. Maybe adult services first.
So at the moment we haven't committed to overnight staff, and the reason that we haven't done that is because we're actually in the process of doing a piece of work across adults' mental health, where we're looking at journeys and pathways of people and their housing choices. So we're actually we've just set up a co-production group where we'll be working with people with lived experience of mental health and starting to understand and unpick what they feel that they would need, working alongside both people with lived experience, but also professionals who have worked with people in residential and supported housing environments. So what we want to do is have a really rounded look at the type of provision, build up a really strong service specification. Yes, learning has been taken from the previous provision, and we have made a recommendation. We have made a commitment to sharing a management plan with local neighbours, but also as part of the co-production, bringing local neighbours on board with that piece of work as well. So anybody who wants to be involved in the co-production of the service and building the service specification can be involved.
Through you, Chair, would there be provision if it was determined that there'd need to be an overnight staff member? Would that just take a unit, for example? Yeah.
No. So we've got staff facilities within the provision that we've within the drawing provision. So any overnight staff would be seen as a concierge night. We wouldn't have sleep-in staff in that kind of provision. So yeah, that would be our preference, would be to have our concierge, but there's plenty of space in the office on site that could provide that.
Just to say as well is that we do have a condition for that management plan as well. Yeah. In terms of the landscaping, the beds that you speak about are outside of the red line boundary. It's not part of the site. However, as part of the treatment of the trees, they will be pruned and cut back to a suitable length. As far as I know, there aren't any plans to upgrade the Sandlings at the minute. That's certainly something we can discuss with the applicant, but it's not included within this application.
Chair, could we just step in there? We will be just improving, yes, that stretch of land adjacent the site. Obviously just to enhance the Sandlings in any which way we can, but we're limited in terms of what we can do because obviously we can't interfere with the parking, because that would have involved a sort of significant sort of consultation exercise with the residents on the Sandlings, and of course we weren't able to sort of provide a pavement along that stretch anyway as part of this scheme. So there will be sort of substantial sort of replanting along that stretch fronting the Sandlings. it's at the site, it's outside the site, but we will be sort of dealing with it sort of via a kind of an equivalent sort of Section 106 agreement. So yes, that's very much part of enhancing the setting of this development, of course.
Councillor Dunstall.
Thank you. Couple of things. Some people have touched on these already. So yeah, we've had a bit of a conversation about the staffing, and that's fine. Would it be a commissioned service or a council-run service? Is one question. And I think we sort of touched on this again. Is it intended as permanent accommodation, or is it intended as kind of 1 or 2 year temporary accommodation? And sort of linked to that, what is the tenure? I'm assuming that these would be assured short-hold tenancies if it's single occupancy accommodation, which is fine and wonderful, but brings with it some complications around if people do need to be moved on, eviction processes and that sort of stuff. So just to get clarity on that, and linked to that, in section 6.2.15, it highlighted a whole range of tenures. So it was private rent, council rent, owner occupied was mentioned in there, which I thought sounded slightly odd. Might just be copy and paste, I don't know. Assuming it's all single tenant accommodation. And lastly, concierge services. I know that across the kind of supported accommodation sector, that has become quite a standard thing. There can be a bit of a Wild West sort of third-party concierge service. Is that something that would be delivered specifically by the whoever, whether it's commissioned or in-house, or whether we would be looking to get that from a third-party organisation?
Yeah, sorry, I didn't introduce myself, sorry, before. I'm Emily Snelling. I'm the Supported Accommodation Development Lead, so working across adult social care and the supported housing developments. In terms of the concierge service, just to finish that one, we would probably go through our in-house security provision, which would be, I think at the moment is procured through United Guardians, but obviously that may have changed by the time this building opens. So we will be working with our FM services to determine the best route to secure that service. In terms of whether we're going to insource or outsource this provision, we will, as part of the, once we've built up the service specification for the service that will be offered, we'll do an insourcing assessment to see whether we could run it internally. Current preference, across talking across adult social care, is that we would provide this as an internal service. However, we need to make sure that we've got the skills to run that service, and that will be part of the assessment that we'll undertake as part of the, any commissioning service, that if we do go through commissioning, we'd have to have demonstrated that we weren't able to insource it. Is that the answer that you wanted on that? Is that okay? Yeah.
And sorry, there was just some tenancy related.
Okay, the tenancy. So my understanding is councils can't give out assured short hold tenancies. It's a bit different in the other project, because essentially the landlord is a charity. It won't be in this case. We'd probably be looking at some kind of secure tenancy, but they're fixed terms and they'll have break clauses in them, is my understanding. We wouldn't be able to offer a lifetime tenancy because obviously we would always be hoping that somebody is going to be able to move on to their own permanent housing eventually. There may be a case where people do stay there for much longer or end up staying there for the remainder of their lives, but we would always be seeking to move for somebody to achieve full independence. So we wouldn't be offering lifetime tenancies on this accommodation.
I guess my query in relation to tenancy was more to do with, if there are issues, what's the likely period of time? Obviously we hope that nobody has to be evicted, but if somebody does have to be moved on and they don't want to be moved and you have to go through an eviction process, that can be a lengthy process in my experience. So yeah, just some clarification about that.
I think we'd have to come back to you on that one, because we'll have to get legal advice on what the requirements, like what tenancy break clauses we can put into any agreement that we've got. This would be the first building so far that we've got one more coming on board, but that hasn't been set up either yet. So yeah, we'd have to come back to you on that one if that's okay.
Sorry, I'm just going to bolt one more question onto that. In terms of age ranges, is there any specification around that, or is it just over 18s, or is it, yeah?
So it would be an adult service. In reality, the majority of people who are at the sort of stage in their journey and with the kind of disability that we're talking about, they're more typically people in their 40s and 50s, sometimes in their 60s, often people who have got long-term chronic illness but are at a more stable sort of stage in their lives and their health conditions better managed. So it's typically a sort of slightly older age cohort that you might see in some of the short-term supported housing schemes that you see. And people with severe mental illness unfortunately have very high health inequalities and very short life expectancy relative to other groups. So physical health conditions come on much earlier in people. So there's an element of physical health as well as mental health that would be managed in the scheme.
Councillor White.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just going back to the question of access that was raised at the beginning, and it was stated that the Sandlings access road has no pavement and so is considered not appropriate for it to be the main access point. I'm not sure that that's actually correct, because there is a pavement running from a point on the opposite side from where the development is going to be, on the same side of that road as the Sandlings building itself, from a point very close just to the south of the southernmost point of the development, all the way to Wymark Road. So it seems to me that it wouldn't have been much of an effort to put in a crossing or something to allow access from the southern end of that site. And seeing that the Turnpike Lane is the closest access, and that seems that the closest public transport link, the closest tube station, and the southern end of the site would probably be the best access point. Why that opportunity wasn't taken up? It just seems that it really, and also the assertion, it just sounds like that road is being characterised as kind of busy and dangerous, and it's actually not. It's more of a car park, really, particularly at that far end, because there is a gate across that road where it links to Wymark Avenue. So there is actually no through traffic. So it does seem to me that there's an opportunity that was missed to allow easy access that isn't there for the people who live in the buildings that are currently there to the nearest public transport link.
I say I'm happy to, through you, Chair, just pick up on what the councillors sort of highlighted. I mean, first of all, as I mentioned before, councillor, there isn't a pavement along there. Okay. Now, if we were to sort of effectively reconfigure the Sandlings, it would have been quite a different project, and that was beyond the scope of the brief set to the council's delivery team in seeking to provide some supported accommodation for adult social services. If we were to look at providing a pavement, it would involve removing a significant number of car parking spaces. That would have entailed a substantial consultation exercise, as I mentioned before, with the estate on the Sandlings. And again, I emphasise that was beyond the scope of the project. Now, there's also another important element to this. The brief set by Adult Social Services was also to ensure that there was controlled and safe and secure access for the new residents. and it was considered with their agreement that that was best served by the existing access. So I think it's really important that that point is sort of considered. And I think sort of Emily, I don't know if you just want to just highlight that if, you know, if you felt it was appropriate to look at an alternative access, that would have been something that we might have considered from the Sandlings, but it wasn't as part of your brief.
Yeah, so just to confirm, we needed vehicle access for the 2 disabled parking spaces. We wanted a controlled access where staff could manage people coming in and out of the site, but also residents could feel safe within their own environment as well. And that's why we had asked for the pathway to be created where it is. Does that answer the question?
Well, it does, but I am quite surprised to be told that there is no pavement, because I'm looking at Google Street View now and I'm very familiar with it myself, so I know that the Google Street View is an accurate representation of what's there, and there is a pavement. Well, the gap between where the pavement starts and the southern end of that site is not very large, and there are no car parking spaces in that space. There is a bin yard and there's some grass.
Through you, Chair, if you don't mind, Councillor, there isn't a pavement across the entire length of the Sandlings, and like I said, that was beyond the scope of the brief. It was felt unnecessary. Now, if we were to go down a route of reconfiguring the Sandlings, it's a very different project. You know, we are talking about sort of effectively converting a service road, a car park, as you say yourself, into a usable street in a traditional sense of a word. That was certainly not something that we were sort of intending to achieve. And in fact, it wasn't sort of part of the brief that Adult Social Services required. So, you know, it may or may not be a good idea to, you know, turn the Sandlings into a street, and one day that may happen. But for the moment, that certainly is sort of something that was outside, you know, the council delivery team's requirement. Thank you.
Yeah, Chair, I think if it would be helpful, we have Maurice from Transport just to clarify on that point as well.
Chair, if I may through you, there is a limited section of paving, and that only provide access to the residential block. I'm looking at as well. What we have is that we have parking on both sides of the Sandlings. I think Councillor White is right that if there was a desire to, and Martin is also right, to reconfigure an access via the Sandlings, it would be possible, but that would involve reconfiguring the carriageway, removing the current parking, or trying to find a gap in between the trees. But there isn't a continuous paving there. I think the Sandlings is designed that there is a pedestrianised path in the middle, and it's an estate I'm familiarised with, that goes all the way through the middle of the Sandlings and link into Berry Road, the other side of Berry Road, Waymark Road, and that's a good pedestrianised path. But on this section that we're talking about here, which is the back section, which backs onto this side, there isn't a continuous paving on the side or on the other side. It's broken up by car parking. It is possible, but as I mean, I'm happy to share my screen if the chair allows me to do that briefly, so we can put it to rest. Yep, there we go. Can we all see that? Yep. Yeah. Yep. So this is the development site here, and if it were to happen, we would have to probably move this forward and get rid of this parking to put a footway this side. On the other side, there is some paving here which provide access to the residential block, but there isn't a continuous paving apart from this section here. But I think the side we are interested in is this side essentially. So we'll have to move these cars forward and reconfigure the Sandlings, which would require a consultation process with residents of the Sandlings because it's a Homes for Haringey estate. So I think That's pretty much it for the Sandlins. So I think the pavement is definitely required on this side to gain the access, which would mean we'll have to lose a car parking or remove the car parking somewhere. Hope that helps.
Oh, sorry, Councillor Brennan, did you have your hand? No, you didn't. Okay. Right, so I think I was going to say that as there are no objectors, members can ask questions of the applicants and supporters, but I think we've gone into that quite naturally anyway. So do members have any other questions, please? Councillor Bartlett.
You sort of touched on this before about the staffing element, but I wonder if you could basically talk us through what the benefits are of having this kind of accommodation for people. You know, you've obviously said that it's better having people in private accommodation, but kind of what provision will there be day to day, and also if you could just be really explicit about nighttime as well. Thank you.
Sure. So the nature of the on-site staff team that you put together slightly depends on who's living there and their needs. So these are all people who've got statutory entitlement to adult social care services and are often sort of active users of NHS services. So as we develop the model and work at the specification that Emily spoke about, that will shape exactly the staff team. But typically, there's a combination of support workers who might be more focused on sort of day-to-day tasks and supporting people to access the community, and will know about the benefits system and the health system and be able to help people navigate those kind of core things of daily life, and support people also with practical tasks if they're struggling on a particular day or particular week with managing and maintaining their home. Increasingly, we use peer support workers, so other people with lived experience in that skill mix, so people who've been users of mental health services themselves and have a different kind of relationship with people who use services and can provide some additional support. And often that's more around accessing the community and having a better quality of life. Typically, you don't see that so much in some of the schemes that people may be living in at the moment, and they can be a bit more institutional. This is more about trying to give people a better quality of life in a more normal setting and a home of their own. Depending on people's needs, they could also be personal care workers who provide sort of more hands-on sort of personal care support with people, and they'd all be backed up by teams of social workers, nurses, occupational therapists, and doctors in the multidisciplinary teams that provide the sort of oversight away from the service for the people who'd be living there, and they'll reach into the scheme to support that staff team on site. So whether it's concierge or whether it's 9 to 5 or 9 till 8 or 9 till 11 depends a little bit on who lives there, and effectively their level of need will drive effectively the level of resource that we'd put in to match their need to help them sustain a good quality of life and kind of safe independence there. So more flexible day support that might start a little bit earlier if people are up early and might go a little bit into the evening. If people are around in the evening, often works well rather than a strict 9 to 5. Concierge does work well for most overnights for most people. I think one of the things that we've got an opportunity with now with capital developments that we didn't have in the past, and we've done very few of these sorts of schemes in Haringey for working age adults, is to better utilise assistive technology. So now we can really use those sorts of noise, heat, light, sensors, door motion sensors to better understand how people are living, but also to mean that we need slightly less intensive or invasive staffing and less door knocking and bothering people than we might have had to have done in the past. And we can blend it with that technology as well and build that into the scheme. That particularly helps with managing antisocial behaviour and those sorts of things, because you've got noise detectors. But in reality, people living in these schemes are much more likely to be victims of antisocial behaviour and harassment than perpetrators of them. So it's a big part is about helping people settle into the community and design, and a purpose-built scheme that's sort of got that safety built in really helps us have more sensible levels of staffing.
Is there a plan to be a restriction on who can access the site? So would people be allowed, guests and other people, or would it just be restricted to those who live there and those who would be working?
Guests would be permitted. This is somebody's home, so we can't prevent people from having family members, friends, visit them. However, as part of the support work that we would be commissioning, whether it be internally or externally, we would be looking for tenancy management, managing your visitors, and learning the skills to be able to kind of manage that in the community. With this group of individuals that we're talking about, when we're not necessarily talking about people with erratic kind of or chaotic lifestyles. We're talking about people who've lived with mental health issues for many years, and quite often they are more vulnerable to being exploited than actually kind of presenting those behaviours. So where we could look at use of assistive technologies is around monitoring the use and seeing who's in the building. We can also work with people around making sure that they keep themselves safe.
Councillor Buxton.
Thank you, Chair. Kind of on a similar point to that, and I'm interested about what requirements there would be, or not requirements, but what could be explored with the neighbouring community, i.e., perhaps not the Sandlings because they can't walk down there, but Meads Road, Russell Avenue, those kind of surrounding roads where people the residents might be walking down, and they see one of the other residents. How can we ensure that there's cohesion between the local residents, their understanding of the people's problems, and yeah.
Yeah, no, I get where you're coming from. So I think that's where the management plan comes in. Really, it becomes really important, because it's about how we integrate this service provision into its community and how we connect it with its community. So as part of the planning process, when we went out to public consultation, we did kind of make a commitment to local residents that we would want to work with them on developing the service specifications, but also on how this provision might run and how they might connect with it. So we're definitely, that will be part of the co-production, and co-design is not just about working with people with lived experiences and professionals, but actually local residents, so that when we have the management plan, but local residents are very clear on how they can engage with and how they can connect with the service, whether it be getting hold of staff because they have a concern, or they've seen something happening in the locality that they think might be a risk to residents, but also ways in which our staff can actually communicate and share information with local residents as well.
So, can I just come?
All right. Well, one more. Go on.
Sorry, just if there's any. Those are all very good words. Are there any concrete, are you knocking on the doors? Are you putting leaflets through? Are you, kind of inviting them in, etc.?
So we haven't as of yet. We've just got on the mental health accommodations pathway work. We've literally just got a cohort of residents with the lived experience who've been identified. So that's a bigger piece of work, not just for this project, but across the mental health pathway. So we want to set up a subgroup of that group, and we would like to invite local residents to join the subgroup. Yeah, and that would be done by either a letter drop or by door knocking.
And just maybe if I have one final comment, typically once we get closer to opening, we'll write to neighbours, often do open days so people can come along, maybe a street barbecue, something like that. We try and facilitate good neighbour relationships, so it's not seen as a scheme that people might be anxious of, that their neighbours on your street, and support workers have got an important role to facilitate that through good communication with neighbours and trying to normalise it.
Chair, if I may, just on that point, I think just bringing us back to what the policy says. So I think on this point, really, it's 6.2 22 on page 325. So that sets out that our policy on specialist housing says that housing facilities are suitable for the intended occupiers in terms of provision of appropriate amenity space, parking and servicing, the level of independence, level of supervision, management and care and support. And that's what has driven condition 21 about the management plan. So obviously, this is very much led by the team providing this. They're the experts in this, and are speaking from previous experiences that have fed into the wording of that. So, from a planning policy position, it's clear that you can be satisfied that that policy is met, and how that is produced thereafter is really for the team to pick up.
Okay, thank you very much, everyone. So, are there any other questions? No. Okay, thank you. Right, so we will now move to the recommendation. I'd like to ask Mr. McNocker to confirm the recommendation with a summary of any changes, please.
Thank you, Chair. Straightforward on this one, no points in the addendum and no additional conditions or obligations. So recommendation is to grant planning permission. As it's a council scheme, there's no legal agreement, but necessary measures will be secured through exchange of letters between the relevant assistant directors. So that's the recommendation.
Thank you. We'll now move to the vote. So all those in favour, please show. Right, so I don't have to ask for any, no, do I have to ask for, I don't, right.
Because everybody's voted.
Everyone's voted. Okay, so that's carried. I just wanted to be sure because it's always good to check. Thank you. Okay, that's carried. So we'll now move on to item 10, which is update of major proposals. This is to note, but are there any questions? Councillor Corley-Harrison.
A couple of notes. I think I mentioned last time, maybe a time before, to have the full addresses of each one in there rather than just the kind of colloquial term. And also last time I asked about Crouch Hill, and I think it was going to be added back on because discussions had opened again. Is that right? But it's missing again.
Yes, sorry, Chair. This has been a bit of a victim of just people being on leave over the summer. Right. So for October, we'll make sure to have full addresses and an update on that site.
Could we add a section, because it's split in sections, of just any other major, any others that would normally appear on this list that are on hold, or what, just so we know that they're in hand and last discussion was whenever or whatever. And then I do have a question, which is on the appeal of the goods yard. I think that started over the summer, or did it start over the summer? What's the status?
Yes, normally we would have expected a decision on that by now. The inquiry closed at the end of July. The decision on High Road West has affected the position on that in terms of for environmental impact assessment. They are required to consider any committed schemes, so that's schemes with planning permission. So the resolution to grant then affected that position, which has meant the inspector has asked them to give consideration of that permission. So the inspector has to receive that and consider it before they can issue a decision. So at the moment, I'm not clear on what the timescales are for that, but I think that's probably at least another 6 weeks away.
Okay, thank you. So we will make those additions, Councillor. Item 11, there are no new items of urgent business. So the date of the next meeting, please note it's the 10th of October 2022. And the meeting is now closed. Thank you.